Okay, so I'm Jason Sulliman, Troy University trombone, and with me is Mary Galime, who is the director of I already forgot it. I can't believe I'm
Director of marketing.
director of marketing for Denis Wick products. Thank you so much for being here today. I wanted to take this opportunity just to kind of dive in a little more deeply. You gave a great presentation for our brass area studio
Thank you.
classes, and I thought it would be fun to dive in kind of a little more in more of a long form. So you're a trumpet player.
Mhm.
And you started, I'm assuming, when you were a younger person up through some kind of school program,
Yes, indeed.
and then college, professional playing, freelancing, et cetera, et cetera. When did you start getting into equipment like mouthpieces?
Oh, You know, so interestingly, it wasn't really until I started working for Denis Wick because, um, and it's not because I didn't study with good teachers. I was more of a natural player, so I auditioned into Interlochen Arts Academy for high school. So I was amongst a lot of fantastic. Some students that I was there with were very, well, actually, no, that there was a couple that were very product minded and kind of knew what they were doing, and
Hmm.
it didn't make sense to me. And I have a degree, my bachelor's and master's in music performance. I studied with at DePaul University with members from the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. John Hagstrom, who's built his own mouthpieces,
Right.
and somehow like knowledge of mouthpieces always went over my head. And also, I've never been, I think, a massive equipment person. I think when I was in high school, and at Interlochen, it was, competition to get to the orchestra. And it was while I was sitting principal in the orchestra, I went through an issue with my embouchure, which had me like I watched over the space of a month my fairly good range just slowly slink into this like tiny, it was
Right.
horrible. And it kind of started with overblowing in a mouthpiece, and trying to fix that issue through product was not working. It
Right.
was an anxiety thing, I think, that was happening. But I went through a stage during that process that I was trying to fix it with product and change up mouthpieces. And of course that wasn't working. So I think that experience in itself kind of turned me off from just trying to find a mouthpiece. And I think that probably turns a lot of people off. At some point as a brass player, we think, well, maybe I could fix this with product. And because we know nothing about product and we don't know our own faces well enough,
Right.
we have a bad experience. And so we say, well, good enough is good enough, and I'm just going to stay here, which isn't
Hmm.
really the answer either.
Right.
So I think that probably described my life from there until, I started working for Denis Wick. And I got into Denis Wick playing in the brass bands. Spent money and loans on planning on being part of the CSO someday. And then I got done with grad school and I started playing with the Chicago Brass Band, which is a competitive brass band. And
Yep.
oh, it was just the most thrilling thing. I just looked forward those. I hated going to auditions. I got through, whatever orchestral, sub gigs I was doing, and I looked forward to brass band stuff. And I
Right.
thought, the goal is to be happy doing what I'm doing. So I kind of veered
Yeah.
away from orchestral and decided I love chamber music. I love brass band, and that's where I
Yeah.
shifted my career focus.
They
And
call
then
it
started,
the I was just gonna say they call it the getting the brass band bug. And
yeah.
I saw the Chicago brass band. I was at NABA. I go to NABA every year,
Oh
or
yeah.
as many as I can. And I've done a lot of work with Atlantic Brass,
Yeah.
and with David Childs, who used to do
Yes.
the North American Brass Band Summer School up in Halifax.
Yes.
So yeah, brass band is fantastic. And
Yeah.
as a bass trombonist, orchestras are fun, but when I'm
Yeah.
playing in a section where there's two rows of baritones, euphoniums, and four tubas, it kind of it can be a little gluttonous, and it's fun to play as a bass
Yeah.
trombonist in a brass band. So
Yeah. You
anyway,
go from counting to playing, like
right, yeah,
counting and everything else and just playing your face off in the brass bands, which is what I loved. So,
yeah. I
and
really
that was,
thought Chicago sounded great this year.
oh yeah, I haven't played with them in years now, but they've always been a great band to play with. It's such a great community to be a part of, no matter what band you're in. It's just, I
Right.
loved brass banding.
Yeah,
Um, at the
but
time I was playing, oh,
please
go
go ahead.
ahead. At the time, I was playing on the cornet, Dennis Wick cornet mouthpieces, but I hadn't really found a trumpet mouthpiece I could, settle in on. And it, this is, I had already started the Alliance Brass Quintet with Chris O'Hara, and I'm not sure if Kelly was in the brass quintet by that point. I think this was early on, but I remember we were rehearsing for one of our shows, and these were like long 2 hour long brass quintet shows, which were a little taxing.
Right.
And at the time, Denis Wick had just came out with the American Classic Mouthpiece. And at the time, I was playing on a Lasky trumpet mouthpiece, which I liked, but I couldn't, I could play consistently one sound, but I couldn't expand. I couldn't shift the sound. And
Right.
with my cornet playing, I could lean into the sound and lean out of the sound and change the
Right.
colors. And so I was in the process, and I think this is the healthy place to start. I realized I wasn't getting the tone I wanted out of this mouthpiece, that for every other respect, it was comfortable. I felt supported. I had good endurance. Everything was going good, but the tone I wanted out of it was not what I wanted.
Right.
So I'd been kind of lightly searching for the things. Denis Wick makes this American Classic mouthpiece. I stick it in for the rehearsal, and this rehearsal was running long, and we ended with I can't remember what it was, but I remember having to do an octave jump at the very end of it. And on this American Classic, which had felt like my last gap to that point, after 3 hours of playing, the octave just popped for me. And
Yeah.
it was like explosions went off in my head, and I became a product person because I realized product does make a difference. First
Yeah.
and foremost, you've got to be doing this correctly. You've got to know your face, but product makes a difference. And my
Right.
endurance changed, my ability changed, my ability to change the sound as I needed to. And all these things that I think over the years I'd learned about mouthpieces and sound, it all came together through finding a mouthpiece that was playing with the sound that I actually wanted. And I
Yeah.
learned that, you manipulate. So when you don't get the sound right away, the mouthpiece can feel really good. But if you're not getting the right sound, your ear is your strongest muscle, and your ear will tell your face to manipulate in ways that you can't stop to get the sound
Right.
that you want. So finding the mouthpiece that creates the sound off the bat, you'll know it.
Right.
Everybody around you will know it, and then you'll feel it in 1,000 different ways as well.
So
So
do you think that that also could imply that until you really know the sound that you want, it may be too early to start experimenting with equipment to any major extent?
yes, this is like one of the big pieces of advice. If you go to any of the instrument pages on dennisbeck.com, there's a section that gives you resources for finding your mouthpiece. And one of the first
Right.
things that I say is you have to know the sound. You need a tone
Hmm.
concept. You need to know what you want to sound like, because that is going to lead what you choose.
Right.
And feeling, sound comes first, everything else comes second.
Right. So with I feel like I've taught brass techniques for a number of years. I've taught it at a couple of different institutions, and I feel like there's kind of this mantra of the one page handout says Bach 7C, Bach 5C, Bach 3C. And that's often a way, like kind of a default way that people say, this is how you can start your trumpets and this is how you can progress your trumpets. And it seems like people kind of use that, or it seems like many people kind of use that as a way to say, okay, here are some basic guidelines. And that should get you to a point where you are studying with a teacher or you know more about what you want, and then you can kind of, veer off. Do you have any particular go-tos that you recommend for younger players that kind of will get them through that early, gestation period, to kind of get them up to the point where, okay, now you may have some thoughts on your own, or
Mhm.
probably have a teacher, or, how do you approach the beginning stages of starting players?
This is an interesting question because now I wear two hats for marketing. I'm the director of marketing for Denis Wick products. I also just became director of marketing for North America, for P-Bone, and
Oh, right.
which has changed the way I think about how beginners need to start on brass instruments
Yeah.
drastically. Because yes, I was of the mind that you need to start on a smaller mouthpiece for trumpets, like a 7C, 5C, and then move down. And I don't think that's bad advice. I think I think where the student starts at these days is less important to me to how long we stay on that mouthpiece. Because the biggest issue I see, it's not what mouthpiece size students are starting on. It's that I go to high schools, I talk to freshmen in college, and you ask them what they're playing on, and they say whatever came in the case. So if they're still playing on their student instrument, they're still playing on the student mouthpiece that came in the
Right.
case.
Three,
And
four,
when you
5 years later. Yeah.
when we look at like band numbers of kids who are staying in bands, how many of those kids might have stayed in band longer if they had been moved to the next size bigger to get better sound, where where it's not just to get a sound, but they've got to like the sound that they're making. So if
Hmm.
they stop liking the sound because they're getting backed up on, too small equipment,
Hmm.
what happens then?
And you're also dealing with students that are going through a physical maturation, like they are changing size.
Yeah.
They're change like their lung capacity is changing, their extant muscular strength is changing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of factors that I'm sure play into that, from a
That's a
physical
really good
standpoint.
point. Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
and
I didn't.
also, I guess if you start like fifth grade band, fourth grade band, if you don't start until sixth or seventh grade band, that might be a different answer as well, I would think.
Yeah. So this is what's happened interesting to how I've been thinking about this. So this is, don't I might change my mind in another month, but right now I'm kind of
Right.
convinced. One of the products I've been working with through P-Bone is this instrument called the P-Buzz. If it's like
Yeah.
basically a bell, and then
With
it
like the
slides in and
movable.
out. Yeah, but you get a full five notes. So, we're suggesting replace recorder because, when you're looking at how kids get to band, where does recorder lead? Certainly doesn't lead to any
Right.
brass
More
instruments.
of a woodwind inspired, on ramp.
Yeah, and it's not really teaching from a woodwind standpoint. It's not really teaching you how to breathe and how to blow
Right.
either. It's literally teaching you technique that you might translate. And it's so when we're talking about band numbers and kids are starting band later and later, what if your general music class started with this P-Buzz that got them ready for brass instruments or woodwind instruments in terms of breathing? It's teaching them. I mean, you have notes that you got to move the slide out to, but you really are leading the note with your ear. So it's teaching kids at a
Right.
young age to, play from their ear and to breathe correctly. It's half the
Right.
battle.
I mean,
So,
as a trombone professor, you're preaching to the choir.
yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah.
But
I mean, you spend as an instructor for an advanced student, I spent every lesson, a good portion of the lesson teaching the student, reminding the student to lead with their ear and telling them to breathe. So if they're getting this in the first stage with the P-Buzz, fantastic.
right.
That's the basis.
Right.
For me, as a trumpet player and a mom of a, young kid, my son is 8 years old now. And since he was, able to grab out of things, we've had this Denis Wick mouthpiece that got damaged and it's just been sitting on a bookshelf and Alfred will pick it up and play and buzz. And and I have stayed out of it because I do not want to be the
Right.
parent who shoves music down this kid's throat. If he likes it,
Yeah.
he likes it. But I watch him buzzing, and it was a bigger Morris Murphy mouthpiece. Wasn't like it was a small size, and his face is small too as a little kid. I love watching little kids like pick up a mouthpiece, 3, 4 year olds and play a trumpet mouthpiece because they can play it. Their mouthpieces are so small that things like a tuba mouthpiece for them, right?
Right. Right.
So they can get a buzz. But anyway, but even with that, like I could see him trying to get bigger sounds and backing up and neck tension. And I didn't,
Yeah.
as a teacher in me, I was like, oh, you can't do, but I just wanted him to play around. Enter the P buzz. It's a big mouthpiece. Think
Yeah.
like a smaller trombone mouthpiece.
Right. Right.
Um,
Probably more of
and the
like a
kids,
Bach 12C trombone kind of
something
size
like that,
mouthpiece. Yeah.
yeah. And or like a alto horn, or I don't know. It's big.
Yeah.
And he picks that up, and he's been playing on the trumpet mouthpiece since he's known how. And he picks up the P-Buzz and learns he can make a farting noise on it. And this thing
Hooked.
comes with him to cartoons in the morning, and he's, in between commercials or whatever, he's buzzing on the thing, or he's trying to play music along. And my son's a big Star Wars fan, so he marches up and down the hallway playing the rhythm to the opening to Star Wars. And now he's
Right.
teaching himself the
A little bit of
and
contour, maybe. Yeah.
yeah. And he's now experimenting to get a bigger sound and a smaller, smaller sound. And, and then I'm working on this curriculum for P-Buzz for students that they can sit down and take one-on-one lessons. And he's going through all this. Anyway, this isn't a P-Buzz thing. In terms of the mouthpiece, now he's been playing on this big mouthpiece. He's like, huh, I wonder if I can take the mouthpiece off and just buzz into this tiny little tube where the receiver where the mouthpiece goes in. And I'm watching him, and starts with the back pressure that I saw with the trumpet
Sure.
mouthpiece. But
Sure.
because he has the foundation of playing through a bigger mouthpiece and blowing more air on his own without any help from me, he starts fine tuning his face to get
Yeah.
a big open sound on this tiny tube So he's letting his ear lead him. He's blowing correct air, and now he's getting an open sounding buzz through this tiny, tiny tube of a receiver for this mouthpiece. And it blew my mind.
Yeah.
So it made me think that what maybe we need to be starting trumpet players and brass players in general on just a standard bigger mouthpiece to get the air and the buzz going, because once now they're learning it intuitively,
Right.
and they can translate that
Then they
then
can
to the next
focus in
step.
later. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Well,
think I'm wondering if it's easier for students to focus it in rather than focus it out. So starting small and then go big, you know?
Well, yeah, and so some of my background is kinesiology, and so I've studied motor learning, motor control, neuromuscular control of development, all sorts of things along those lines. And one of the things that you learn on that side, on the physiology side, is that if you look at infants, for example, who really don't have any motor control when they're born, like it's
Yeah.
just random behaviors. It's just a sack of potatoes, right? You're carrying them around,
Yeah.
you're feeding them, trying to keep them alive for a while, but then they start to be able to like roll over onto their stomach, right? And then they start to be able to like pick their head up. And then they start to be able to like move around. Then they start to crawl. And there's kind of a certain order of events, and it tends to go from proximal to distal. And it's usually large muscle groups first, and then it gets down to more fine motor control, right? Small muscles. So, they're able to work arms and legs before, and, a little bit of core strength before they're able to do like embouchure type things. But they yawn, they eat, they start
Yeah.
talking, the chewing. And so those kinds of things are training the facial muscles to, kind of a small extent. But it is kind of this process of broad to fine, that kind of just happens naturally with how we
Hmm.
learn how to move, in any kind of capacity. So it could stand to reason that when you start applying that to the brass world or the lip vibrated aerophone,
Yeah.
genre, it would make sense that there's kind of this broad idea that then, becomes finer as you get more coordinated,
Yeah.
I would think.
Yeah. I'm starting to feel pretty strong and like applying this to like when I taught beginner students. I love beginner to junior high age group. I love working with those kids. So I've worked with a lot of them, and just the heartbreak when a student just can't figure out how to get it small enough into the trumpet mouthpiece and,
Yeah.
not have it back up on them. And I just, it was heartbreaking to work with them because once they've gotten the tension there, it's really hard to pull it out.
Yeah. And for a number of years now, so I've been here at Troy, it's my ninth year.
Hmm.
And most of the years we've varied it, and sometimes it depends on faculty availability. Sometimes the brass techniques class starts on trumpet, and then
Hmm.
we work down from there. There was one semester where we needed to start on trombone because I had to go do a thing, so we've swapped the orders. And it gives me pause to think maybe what we should be doing is we should be doing a week of P-Buzz, and then from there branching out, into the
Yeah.
specific instruments, just to get
Yeah.
those basic concepts kind of solidified first, and then applying them straight to the instruments.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've
So
been thinking, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, this whole, so I think this is a fruitful way to think about maybe, how we start beginners. And it kind of leads us perhaps a little bit down the road, a little bit more downstream in terms of the equipment talk.
Mm.
When, I don't know, I also take issue, and maybe that's a strong way to say it, but sometimes when teachers say, here's what you need,
Mm.
they're basing it off of what they see, what they hear, and usually maybe some bias from what they personally experienced when they are experiencing what they think matches what they're seeing somebody physically do or what they're hearing. And that
Hmm.
may or may not always be the case. So how do you broach this kind of transitional time where you're most likely getting advice from a teacher or an instrument rep or, a mouthpiece dealer, not like the trench coat full of mouthpieces on the sidewalk, but like people that are working in the industry like yourself?
Yeah.
How do you broach that aspect of here's what I think you're doing, here's what I think is going on, here's what I think, because I don't
Yeah.
have the same expertise that you do, but I have a doctorate in brass and I teach at a college. So a lot of people would assume me to be like a local expert and would come to me for this advice. But
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily the same level of expert. So knowing that there's kind of this spectrum of expertise, how do we handle that? Like, what do we do?
The interesting thing is a lot of teachers, I mean, I think in my experience and from the teachers I've worked with, I can't think of one teacher who said you should play this. I think so many, even at a college level, teachers are just completely hands off. They don't know what to subscribe to their student because they don't want to make things worse either. because it's
Right.
such a personal thing. I think finding someone who's a specialist who deals with, um, I'm sorry, the only person who's coming to mind right now is actually my husband runs a small music store, and has been working with mouthpieces and specializes in mouthpieces. And he's one of the few people who can sit down and listen to the needs of the student or the professional, even down to chop problems, and say, you know what? From my experience working with 1,000 mouthpiece customers, this is kind of the direction you might want to go. And I've got Denis Wick artists who will even call Rich to talk. And there are people like
Right.
him out there. So like you want to find somebody, and there's students too. Like look, the bigger the pile of mouthpieces, the more experience you have of what's going to work and what's not.
Sure.
Um, but I think trusting your teacher to start your search is a good place to start. But
Yeah.
you have to, I think what's lost in a lot of students is we are so action oriented. We don't want to stop and listen. And going back to, how many recordings are you listening to? Um, how good is your sound concept on what you're doing? For trumpet players, when students come up and say, I want something that's going to increase my range, my first question is, well, how many recordings of
Practice.
high rate practice, but how many recordings are you listening to? Because you're
Right.
playing, are you listening to lots of high range playing over and over and over and over again? There is a lot of technique that goes into it, but if your ear
Sure.
doesn't know the quality of sound that you want, when people think about range, they think about lines on a, ledger lines, or, like
Right.
lines on a
It
on
can
a
be very
page. They're not,
mechanical. Yeah.
yeah, and they stop thinking about tone. They just think about attaining a certain note or a certain place on the page. They're not thinking about the quality of the sound, what they want to sound. And so again, this comes like in my training and my selling points for Denis Wick, that Denis Wick didn't think of range. Denis Wick always thought of sound. So like
Right.
the smaller mouthpieces are still robust enough that they're getting a big sound. They're never laser like. They're not functional in the sense of just getting to the next ledger line. They're with sound in mind.
Right.
So, your teacher has experience in different brands where they know, you know what, this is going to get you a healthy sound, I think, for what you're looking for. Or, I think the better you as a student can listen to a bunch of artists, and if you're trying to go after faster technique, listen to a lot of technique and get the sound in your head, and then, go for the mouthpiece that's helping you get that sound in your
Right.
technique. Because again, if the sound is off, something is going on in your playing, and
Yeah.
only you can figure that out. I mean, your teacher will hear a sudden difference in the ease of your playing, but you know, your body is so connected. For me as a trumpet player, um, any lip tension that I get that, would cause, and even chest tension that was just
Mhm.
imperceptible, and it would only happen when I was in performance on stage. So I couldn't recreate it in the practice room.
Right.
I would say 99% of the time it started in my hand because I'd start gripping my trumpet too
Right.
hard, and it traveled up my arm and into my neck and into my face.
Yeah.
So these little things that no teacher can really know and dictate are affecting the way you play. Now, when you're playing with the sound that you want, and the sound that you want to hear pops out right away, everything relaxes.
Sure.
As you start sounding off, you start gripping harder. And I
Yeah.
I, I can't say that that's exactly what happens for every student, but I'm pretty confident that more
Yeah.
often than not, as your sound stops going, John Hagstrom, my trumpet teacher in grad school, would say, when I talked to him about endurance, he'd say, endurance isn't about playing to, extending how long you can practice. It's how long you can practice with the good sound.
Right.
So, you might only be able to play. And he said sometimes, after, he'll have to back it off. And sometimes I can only play with a good sound for 5 minutes. And I've had to work myself up from there. Because of
Yeah.
course you can play longer than 5 minutes, but can you play
But are you
relaxed with good
surviving it?
sound?
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it all comes down to sound. So I think take your elders' advice strongly, but also know that you have to make the decision on what's clicking for you in that sound area.
Right. I know for me, so my background now kind of came from I was in a pretty bad accident when I was like 15,
Mm,
involving a bicycle, loose gravel, blah blah blah. I cut my face up pretty bad, and I wasn't taking lessons. I wasn't really at a high-powered music program. Family was non-music, non-musical. So there really wasn't anybody to say, hey, this might affect what's going on here. And so as as things healed, or I thought they did, I just jumped, back into band. And I've always been a pretty obsessive practicer. So by somebody who was just kind of outworking everybody around me, I was able to mask, whatever issues were going on. And I ended up doing that for several years into graduate school. And next thing you know, I have a terminal degree and I still can't advance at auditions and something's not quite right. And now I have a pretty good idea something's not right. So I developed kind of this whole process of researching over the past couple of decades to come up with what I call facial stability training. And it's basically what I do now is I actually work with not only my students, but a lot of clients where if there are imbalances in the facial musculature, you're going to basically run into some kind of limitations if you're trying to level up your playing. So if you're a weekend warrior playing in a community band and you can do what you want to do, you're probably fine until you start aging. And then that might cause issues, but otherwise you're okay. But if you're trying to become a better player, you may kind of hit a wall in terms of what your capabilities are to like control the sound that you want to make. So I started approaching it from facial stability and balancing the muscles in terms of strength, coordination, and endurance. Fine. Once I did that, I realized that that's what my facial instability was why I was gravitating towards certain equipment choices, because it seemed to me that I was able to kind of mask, so like this is me looking back, right? I was able to kind of mask some of the deficiencies a little bit by, maybe getting certain types of instruments to play a certain way. But mouthpieces kind of became the final frontier for me. So I seem to have gone from face to horn, and now I'm working into the mouthpiece lead pipe kind of area, right? Do you think that there is kind of an optimal order? I mean, I think we both agree your body kind of needs to be working reasonably well, and that's kind of maybe a step one. But do you think the mouthpiece needs to get sorted out before maybe the instrument? Do you think that there are certain mouthpieces that complement certain instrument types better or worse than others? Do you think it's worth thinking about how to optimize that? Do you go upstream, downstream? How do you approach the complementary aspects of the equipment?
I think, you know, it's a hard, I think the mouthpiece creates the sound, so that is the most important thing to figure out. But the instrument is extremely important too. And I think what you were discussing about unpacking the last, however many years of your playing and realizing that you're masking things with the mouthpiece, it made me think of when I talk about warm-ups. I always say take the feeling out of warm up. It's not a feel good or feel bad. So many players pick up and they say, I feel good about this or I feel bad about this. And this derails your day because it's not about feeling. You need to approach the beginning of the day kind of like you're a computer waking up and it's processing through to make sure everything's correct. And it does its little fine tuning things and it might say, oh, we need an update, or or it might say, oh, we need to give me 5 seconds or don't touch any keys. Yeah.
Buffering.
Because it's doing its diagnostics, right? And we need to approach our day like that. And I think students need to approach mouthpieces like that as well. It starts with sound. It starts with making sure that you're getting sound and you're getting the right sound. But then you need to understand the way your musculature works. You need to understand the parts of the mouthpiece, which is what we did in the meeting I did with your students. Just going through, like this is the rim, it deals with comfort. This is the cup, it generally deals with, sound and articulate, and knowing, so you use your knowledge of the mouthpiece as a diagnostic. Sorry. So in terms of the instrument, I think finding the right mouthpiece makes all the difference in the world. But if you find a great mouthpiece and you buy an instrument or you get a great deal on an instrument that is working great for you as well, but the mouthpiece, then now you need to make the negotiations in the mouthpiece again. There are so many thousands of mouthpieces in the world, and I would like to say Denis Wick is the answer to all of your issues and your problems, and but it's not. Let's be realistic. There's a thousand good mouthpieces, and we need to know about them all. So I think, if you get an instrument that you absolutely love, but now it makes your mouthpiece not quite the right thing, it's the sound that's going to tell you. And now you need to look at your diagnostics. You need to look at what you know about mouthpieces. You need to know about your face. You need to understand that, like a heavier mouthpiece might help brings some solidity to the sound of a very lightweight horn, or if you're
That's
a
that's often
principal.
what I find. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I have a lighter, like a lighter belt, like rose brass into carbon fiber for my bell. It's very light on the back end,
Yeah. Oh,
and
that's
so
yeah.
I find that like heavy on the front end, so big, heavy, to get around the scar tissue, but then
Yeah.
big heavy mouthpiece, sterling silver lead pipe, and then it just kind of lightens up as it goes. And
Yeah.
having that kind of cornucopia, spectrum of materials, etc., I feel like I get a pretty colorful sound, like with that combination. But I
Yeah.
noticed that if I went heavy bell, heavy mouthpiece, it was dense and it was like dead, and I didn't like the color, and
Yeah.
that, but that's personal experience. So I get not
Well, yeah, and
everybody's.
the rise of carbon fiber, bell, trumpet, whatever, has really, made that whole discussion of the weight of the mouthpiece that much, more, I think,
Right.
prevalent in our so
Well, and then
um
on the other end, there's the whole 3D printing now that people are doing.
yeah.
And so that, super light mouthpiece. So, does that work better with like a heavy, like a heavier end, or is the whole thing lighter? And I wonder where that's going to go, because there's a lot of carbon fiber filaments that are kind of coming to the
Yeah.
market and becoming a little bit more accessible for people too.
I think for sound though, like the mouthpiece, I think you can make a mouthpiece out of so many different materials, but mouthpieces resonate with the horn. And
Right.
I think when it comes down to it, the brass, standard brass mouthpieces, which I know it's a mix of metals, um, they resonate and get the sound that we want. I was just talking with one of the top lead players in the studios in LA that I know of out, and I'm friends with him. And so I talked with him about now once a year at the convention in California that I go to. Um, and he was saying, yeah, I'm playing on this plastic or acrylic topped mouthpiece. It's really super comfortable. I love it. And I said, well, tell me, comparing it to a metal mouthpiece, what, can you, is it the same? Because I'm really curious about this. So the allergies on the rise, like I've been doing some research on that. Um, and he said, no, I can't negotiate the acrylic. And this is just an acrylic top. It still is a brass bottom.
Right.
But
Ian
when he's in
Bousfield
the,
did that for a while as well over in
yeah.
London. Yeah.
And for certain things, it's great. But when when this player said when I'm in the studio and I'm recording, when I have to do, I need the brass mouthpiece. So I think the acrylics we're seeing, the 3D printed, they're good for certain situations, but they don't work for everything. And I think the tried and
Right.
true is a metal, and I mean not just any
Yeah.
metal too, because there's mixed reviews about the stainless steel mouthpieces. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
hypoallergenic, but they don't get the
Some
same
people love them,
sound.
some people don't. I'm not a big fan of the sound that I get.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not
So
the same. So taking that logic, it sounds to me like because, sorry, words. One possible way to logically take yourself through this would be, 3D print mouthpieces so that you can figure out the size, the shape, all that, do it in a cheaper way. But if that's not necessarily going to scale up to the actual metal mouthpieces, that might be not as fruitful as people think.
I don't, yeah, because we've talked about years ago, I think it came up in a meeting. This is before I started working for the North American distributor for Denis Wick, and now I work direct. So this was like how do we handle mouthpiece trials? When people want
Mm.
to, because right at that time with the North American distributor, we had these trial cases that would get sent out and come back, sometimes not with all the mouthpieces, and it was a bit of a hassle. So
Yeah,
like, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could just get like acrylic, at the time 3D printing wasn't as prevalent, but some type of easy, cheap mouthpiece we could just set it up for size. And over the years, I don't think that's a good representation because, of course, you can. That's taking sound out of the primary spot, out of its
right.
primary spot. So now you're leading with, well, what's going to be comfortable? What's going to get me my range? What's going to feel? And then once you change the material,
We're
the
back to
mouthpiece is going
feel.
to. Yeah. And I
Right.
think anytime we say it feels right and let that be, it feels good. I can't think of a situation, and I might be wrong, I just haven't thought of it yet, but I have not thought of a situation where feel should lead in front of sound.
Yeah.
It has to lead with sound, sound and story. It was not Arnold Jacobs' biggest sound and wind or and
Yeah.
story, and
Song
like
and wind. Doesn't
yeah,
matter how it feels, it's all about how it sounds. That's very
yeah,
that yeah, that it I don't want to say it started with Jacobs, but he was definitely one of the first big, pedagogues that
yeah,
really disseminated that into our brass world.
yeah.
Yeah. So now, splitting hairs a little bit,
Yeah.
you're climbing the ladder. You've made it past eighth grade band. You're past high school. Maybe you're into grad school, entry level professional field. You're taking auditions. Some people seem to say something to the effect of, "This is my biggest weakness, so I want to find equipment that helps me navigate those weaker areas of my playing."
Yeah.
And this is under the assumption that they've done a lot of due diligence with practicing and studying and all that. So, but they recognize that this is a strength of mine. This is less of a strength of mine. Still a goal of mine. I'm going to pick equipment that's going to help me with that, maybe weaker stuff, and kind of, help me out there. Then there are some other people that I know that have kind of gone the other approach and said, no, no, no. This is the strongest thing I do. This is what I'm known for. This is the biggest bat I have in my arsenal. And I want equipment that puts, that really brings this out and really enhances this aspect of my playing. So I will, world domination via whether it's range or volume or speed or, whatever. Do you have any thoughts on, I don't know, where people should maybe think about or how they should navigate that when they get up to that pre-professional and budding professional stage of their, kind of journey?
Yeah. That's interesting because I think it comes down to what instrument you play also.
Yeah.
Um,
And probably what ensemble you're trying to play in. Because I remember, like, for
yeah.
example, was it Phil Myers, who I just was known for this just gargantuan sound, but he was playing in the New York Philharmonic, which is probably, I would say, one of the louder orchestras
Mm.
in terms of decibel production. So if you're a good loud player, that may not work
Yeah.
in Philly, but that's
I think so. So the question, and I just want to make sure I'm answering the right question here. We're talking about how much does equipment play into your skill? And I think part of the question on paper was also like when I was reading over your questions was multiple mouthpieces versus one mouthpiece. Is this kind of
sure.
the discussion we're having? Yeah. Okay. So I've thought about this a lot because at a very basic level, um, if you're a marching band student, you should have a different mouthpiece for the field than for the stage because your environment is completely different. And this is the extreme. So, I am not a big mouthpiece person, but, if you have to blow your brains out on the field, doing that on the mouthpiece you're going to play in the concert hall is going to completely screw you up when you have to come
Yeah.
back into the concert hall. And there are
And
things there's tools you can have to help pull yourself back in, but
right.
so as a trumpet player, uh, we have like I would go for a lightweight mouthpiece for outside on the field that will respond very quickly and project, and
Yeah.
find the same mouthpiece but in a heavier weight for the stage. So you're not changing sizes and stuff, or very, very
Right.
similar at least for the stage. Because you don't want to like confuse the embouchure by jumping
Yeah.
to extremes in sizes. And that's I think when people pick multiple mouthpieces, their first instinct is to go to the biggest mouthpiece, to the smallest mouthpiece, to the one in between that you play for everything potentially. And
Right.
so when we're talking multiple mouthpieces, small increments are always what we go for because you don't
Sure.
want to have to adjust a lot. Whether you need to do that or not, I think if you talk to anybody who does use multiple mouthpieces, no one will say this mouthpiece gets me this note. They'll say I can get this note on this 90% of the time mouthpiece. But when I'm in the studio and I need to play this note 10 times in a row, I choose this. It's not
Right.
getting the note, it's just making the job easier.
It's making the job
Um,
easier. Right.
so this lead player in LA, who's, on thousands of recordings, top call, he was actually really like he loved the Denis Wick 4X. When I gave it to him years ago at this convention, he was sending me video after a video of like his love for the 4X. And I
That's got to
think
be inspiring when you help somebody find like their
yeah,
Excalibur, kind of a thing.
yeah. And the 4X has been the Excalibur for a lot of people. He took it a couple weeks later into the studio, and I think he was like recording with the Gordon Goodwin Fat Band or something.
Oh,
And,
nice. Yeah.
and had to hit this double F over and over and over and over again. And our 4X or classic 4X is a heavier mouthpiece. It's a standard mouthpiece, but because of the weight in it, and he's used to like a Marcinkowitz, at the time he was used to a Marcinkowitz or the competing with the Marcinkowitz was a little lighter. And so the response of the mouthpiece was just delayed enough to make
A little bit,
playing that
yeah.
double F over and over and over and over again in a studio difficult, which is why in the long run, the 4X didn't work out for him. And
Right.
we came out actually at that point, I was like, oh, it didn't work. Oh, I can't take this anymore. So we came out with the Heritage style mouthpiece because the Heritage style mouthpiece is a very lightweight version.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it responds, every trumpet player I've talked to says I have to teach myself not to work because I didn't realize how much I was working on my previous
Right.
mouthpiece.
Like
It's just
overworking on
so,
it, yeah.
yeah, it's such a quick response. And I mean, that's good for a lot of reasons. And for some players, it's bad. Maybe you don't want that quick of a response. Maybe you want a more nuanced response. So I'm not saying it's
Right.
the Heritage the answer for everybody, but there are people, I think professionals um, are looking to fine tune a skill they already have.
Hmm.
So I think you should have a mouthpiece just for your own good that you can do just about everything on. And
Yeah.
then if you're going to play multiple mouthpieces, if you're one of those players who can do that, then you look for something to fine tune that. It's not going to get you the skill by any means.
Right.
And even if it does get you the higher note or the skill that you want, there's no reason why you got it on that mouthpiece at that given time. It's
Right.
random. It feels good.
Hmm.
It feels good, but
Right.
we can't base consistency on feeling.
Yeah.
You can base consistency on, on knowing your sound and if the sound is off, knowing what to do about that.
Yeah.
So
I know for me,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say for me personally, and part of this is probably just being poor for most of my life, paying for school, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm,
I've always just been of the mindset of, all right, get new mouthpiece, don't change it for 6 months. Like I'm married to that mouthpiece
yeah.
for, kind of an inordinate amount of time. And then at some point, if there's a voice in my head that starts to say, well, maybe this isn't the best, or maybe there's something then maybe curiosity comes. I try mouthpieces. I get a mouthpiece. I say, okay, I've made this investment. Here we go. This is
Yeah.
and now granted, as a bass trombonist, the I think the needs are a little less specific than, let's say, a recording studio trumpet lead player,
Mm,
in terms of like what I do for my job. But I do think that there is a mentality involved in just get back to the practice room. So for me, it's always been like, nope, I just need to practice my way through this equipment and
yeah.
just make it do what I want it to do. And I don't know if that's heart mode, and in some ways it might be, for some people. But then there are other people that tend to go equipment maybe, sooner in the process.
Yeah.
But
I think that's a great. So we have quite a few artists who have written blogs for Denis Wick Tips about breaking in a mouthpiece and the process. They go through a multi-week process of slowly, bringing in a mouthpiece into their rotation because that's another thing about switching to I call like your home-based mouthpiece, and then you have lots of tools you can use
right,
for the
specialty
tool mouth.
mouthpieces, yeah,
Yeah, the specialty, the tool, whatever you're going to call it. You need to teach yourself how to play it, even if it works great from the beginning. You need to teach yourself because it is a little bit different. So that we have resources at the blog and the blog that kind of walk you through that process and why you need that process.
yeah,
I think the only time that's a bad thing is when if you've gone from, into the store to buy the mouthpiece that's going to help you out with range, and you buy the mouthpiece that gets you the highest note, not the best sound, and then you continue to work on that mouthpiece to get that note back that you got in the store,
right,
because it's the mouthpiece isn't going to magically help you attain something. So again, my favorite article that I've written, as a content creator, the article that you love the most always does the worst. But in
oh
this
yeah,
case,
nobody cares.
yeah,
I
in this case, this article is actually done really well because it speaks to this. It's called the moral code of mouthpieces.
I've read it.
And
Okay,
okay, yeah, and it speaks to this point, like where is your set of morals when you look for a mouthpiece?
right,
Are you looking for the highest note? Are you looking for the lowest note? Are you looking for really fast technique? Or what are we looking for here?
yeah,
And um, so when you're guided by that, you will fail, you will injure yourself. But when you're guided by your sound, and you're leading your sound with, looking for a mouthpiece that's going to support your range, and you're getting the sound that you want out of it. Sorry, you're getting the sound that you want, and it's supporting your range. This is the healthy track to go, and this is the mouthpiece you want to work
sure,
on for the next however. Yeah.
yeah. It's funny being in the South in particular. So our marching band here is called the Sound of the South, and they pride themselves on their sound, and they go for a big sound because that
Mhm.
is kind of, I mean, I may be speculating here a little bit, but the HBCU marching band tradition tends to be volume focused. There's all about, you try to get a lot of sizzle and that laser kind of a sound. And when you get 300 people doing that at the same time, it's really fun. I mean, it's great to hear, and some of the bands sound fantastic. And there's this whole philosophy about, the marching band sound. Most of the non-HBCU institutions tend to be guided by more of maybe a Western European concept of sound that comes from like the choir and the orchestra and all that stuff. And then HBCU sounds tends to be influenced, or it seems like it's influenced more by like gospel
Mm.
and coming from, the gospel church. And so that concept of the vocal belting, is kind of something that a lot of the kids are growing up with, and that's just the
Yeah.
concept of sound that they kind of have. So we, being a school in southern rural Alabama, but are around HBCU institutions, we kind of have this interesting melting pot in terms
Yeah.
of the desirable sound that people are going for. But
Yeah.
we also have a lot of students that are they're taking the same mouthpiece out onto the field and
Mm.
then just trying to do that, you know,
Yeah.
just trying to play with that huge sound. And so they're probably spinning their wheels a little bit. And so it's
Yeah.
interesting. I'm glad you brought that up about playing, in the outdoor arena and how that kind of changes.
Yeah.
Um, quick, oh, I know we don't have a ton of time.
Yeah.
Rapid fire here. Do you believe in clocking your mouthpiece? Do you think that there's a
Oh,
certain
yeah.
point that you have to put it that it'll work a little better? How much do you trust the accuracy of the milling process? Has that been
Yeah.
anything you've gotten into?
Me personally, no, but I know a lot of people, and I've tried it. I just, for my personality, I am like as far from type A as you can get.
Okay.
So I think, you know, it is a if you are trying to rule out variables, clocking is a really good thing you can do that, that like,
And
it's a consistency discussion.
sure. And just so everybody who may be watching this video, if this is my mouthpiece, clocking is where I pick a random, not a random, but I pick a point in the mouthpiece, maybe somewhere within the numbering system or the label or whatever, and I figure out what needs to be at noon on my face. So I'm always using the same setup for my mouthpiece. So I'm clocking it like a clock. But
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, Tim. Please continue.
No, that was it. I think the reason you do that is for consistency. It's just so that you have the same. You're taking away the variables as much as you can from how your instrument is resonating from day to day, how your
Sure.
sound is resonating.
Another question. We had a piano artist that came in. He was sponsored by like the Troy Arts Council, did a wonderful, a solo recital concert, and I was kind of his handler. And so I
Mhm.
was talking with him in the green room and, getting him a bottle of water and doing all the things. And as we were chatting, he said, it's an all Steinway school. And he said, you have lovely Steinways. And I said, thank you. And he said, I feel like they don't get played very much though.
Hmm.
Like the action on them that, you can kind of wear in a piano, like
Yeah.
longitudinally, right? Almost like the
Yeah.
steps of like the Notre Dame Cathedral being worn out from people like the monks walking
Yeah.
there for centuries. Do you think that the soft metals that we're using for our mouthpieces, if you play the same mouthpiece, for decades, or if you play it every day for extended periods of time, do you think you can kind of break in a mouthpiece, or the mouthpiece like almost like a glacial shifting into a certain shape? Do you think it
Yeah.
changes at all over time?
For a standard brass mouthpiece, in my non-scientific opinion, would be no. I think you can wear away the plating, but you can get it replated. I think
Right.
what does change over time is the receiver. If you're somebody who slams your mouthpiece into your receiver over and over again, or I see this a lot with people contacting me like, I do create this a slightly larger this mouthpiece or a slightly smaller because they've gotten a vintage horn and years of different mouthpieces being put in the receiver have stretched the
So
middle
it
on the
kind of
receiver.
stretches out a little bit.
So I think the mouthpiece has little room to change shape without if we're talking about a mouthpiece that hasn't been dropped and repeatedly and whatnot, which I've dropped mine repeatedly. So let's take mine out of the equation. But let's say it's been kept in pristine condition. The only wear and tear it is from playing. I don't think the shape is. I think, for woodwind players, they overlook this a lot with their mouthpieces. The ebonite or whatever the synthetic that their mouthpiece is made out of certainly does wear down over time.
Right.
The rails change, so they start changing their reed. So then when they go to they've been playing on their clarinet mouthpiece for however many years, they go to buy a new one and they say, "Oh, manufacturer, you spot the same mouthpieces and play the same." Well, it's because your mouthpiece is worn down and you've gotten used
Right.
to a different mouthpiece than its original form. So, but
Right.
I don't think
The
that's the
glacial
case.
shifting. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case for metal.
Okay. For people that do drop their mouthpiece, and then for people that take the reamer and tap it out and try to
Oh,
reshape
yeah,
it, I think I know where we're going based on your reaction to that. But I was going to say, how many times can you get away with that? And it's okay if the answer is like really zero if you really want to be high level. But if
yeah.
you're a
I just,
you're a rural middle school band director, you got
yeah,
to tap out some of the dents in the mouthpiece. We all get it.
yeah,
But in terms of coming from, Denis Wick and working on
yeah.
mouthpieces and doing your own high level playing, once you drop it, what's the plan?
I think it depends on the mouthpiece. I have dropped my mouthpiece repeatedly, and I've had to like reshape the bottom. And I don't think it's affected the performance of the mouthpiece. I thought you were talking about like actually getting a mouthpiece and like purposely opening up to modify it, which I do not
That's
agree with.
yeah, like the drilling where sometimes
Yeah.
trumpet players
I
like
don't
bore it
think
out.
I mean that's a whole other discussion, but like
Right.
for the Denis
We're
Wick line,
anti-fracking. I think this
yeah,
room is anti-fracking because
yeah.
all of the components really do have a symbiotic relationship, once you get to
Yes,
an
they do.
optimized.
That's yes, exactly. That's
Yeah.
yes.
But I
But
mean more in terms of like damage control of the structure, from
I
dropping.
think I think for some I can't speak to all manufacturers. I think for the Denis Wick ones, in my experience, unless if the rim and how it's fitting against your face is still intact and you can reshape the shank, I don't think it's a massive detriment. Although, again, fussy about I'm not fussy about these things, and
Hmm.
the designer of the mouthpiece might feel differently, and the person who like they're people who feel differences much different than I do. So I think
Sure.
it's to someone who doesn't feel the differences as closely as I do, there are things that I feel very specifically in terms of rim, and the rim is really important to me, the inner edge and the comfort of the rim. But
So you
after
like the
that,
shape of the rim that sits against the
yeah,
lens.
yeah, for
Right.
me, and then how it resonates, I think the weight and where
Yeah.
the weight of the mouthpiece makes a big difference to me. Those are the things I feel specifically, but there are people who really can have big feels concerning those things, concerning
Sure.
everything in the mouthpiece. And to them, dropping the mouthpiece might be extremely detrimental.
Right.
So
Well, and I know that there are some people that mouthpiece length and then does it touch the lead pipe or is there a gap between the lead
the
pipe?
gap, yeah.
There's a, we could drill down on all sorts of little rabbit holes and there are people that would be very passionate in their opinions on those kinds of subjects, but it sounds like that may not be a hill that you felt like you need to die on.
No, and I think when you get to the like orchestral auditions where there are so few seats and it comes down to being able to be as consistent and as effortless as possible so you can just play exactly what's in your heart and mind, etc. These discussions are really important in understanding these
Yeah.
small things because yeah, these fine-tuned little changes can make a big difference. But for the bulk of us who our job isn't on the line, there's a one job and 500 people are auditioning for
Right.
it in the final round, like
Right. There's 80 people that
it's
could do the job and no one would bat an eyelash as
yeah,
to which one was actually doing it. So
yeah,
how do you win?
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
That's a different level. But
Knowing how those things make a difference too is probably really important. But
right. Now, counterpoint to that um, might be here's a concept that we do in brass class. Let's say we hand all the students the trumpet, and the first thing we do is we pull the tuning slide out. Because if you start playing on a trumpet where the tuning slides are all pushed in the whole way, you're actually playing a slightly shorter tube than the instrument was designed for.
mhm,
And we believe that that's going to lead you to just a little bit of a brighter, tighter sound if that's what you're getting used to. And so even though your face yet isn't developed or optimized toward playing a brass instrument, we move the tuning slide out to where, it's probably going to be, give or take, when you finally do settle into some chops and you finally do, kind of develop that a little bit. With that logic, could that mean that these little tiny, nuanced points could make a difference if employed earlier. I don't have an answer. This is not like a gotcha question.
You know, I think anything is possible. Like I said, I'm about as far from type A personality as I think letting the sound lead everything works very well for me. But there are people who are super passionate about mouthpieces and every single last detail, and they would probably strongly disagree with me. And I would love the disagreement because I just don't, because I don't, I'm not, you have to follow what you're passionate about. So like, if you are super interested in the physics of the sound and how these little things make a difference, you should totally go into that because I bet you can find differences that will help your playing.
Sure.
If you are telling me that it makes a big difference and I should look after it, I'm going to research into it. But because that doesn't resonate with me as a player, it's not going to work
Right.
for me probably. You know what? So
Right.
I think sound, as long as your sound is primary and everything else you get yourself into is secondary to sound, A-okay, go for it, check it out.
Right.
But, I think you'll keep yourself honest and you'll keep yourself safe from going down too far a rabbit hole if you let your sound determine, is this worth is this getting me
Right.
somewhere? Is it good for my sound?
Yeah.
Is it not?
Well, and we keep coming back to sound.
Yeah.
It's probably the
It's
best way to wrap it up, of course.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All the nuance, and we're just coming back to sound one way or another.
I
Well,
think so. But
yeah.
who am I?
Who are any of us, really,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Just trying to sound good. Well, I really appreciate the time, and hopefully students get some benefit out of this, makes them maybe think about some things in ways that they hadn't before. Maybe they want to go down some rabbit holes, and who knows, I might have some students that someday get really into the physics of it or don't. Maybe
And
they're
I would love to
overthinking it
hear their
now, and
findings. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's great. Well, I really appreciate the time, and I'm sure hopefully we'll get to talk again, and our paths will cross again.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank
All
you.
right. Yep. Bye-bye.
We'll see you.